newly constructed community tucked at the brink of Earth's frontier was shadowed by the cloudy sky. Territory's people had gathered to honor music resounding from the clearing close to the main building. Young friends and relatives shouted as a pair stood in the middle, hand in hand, eyes locked, rows above the assembly. Some even wiping away tears, life starting anew under the constraints of promises they had long dreams of. Yet above, in the frigid silence of space, a predator observed. Alien vessel veiled and silent lingered just outside Earth's orbital protections. The species one humanity has come across only in meager, grim conflicts, never went near human area. They would always have thought of people as little. Not about conquest or anything else. This was just another floundering race that would fall under the least of pressure. This invasion was about resources. It was a warning to teach humanity what would happen if they dared extend. The disguised spacecraft hummed, unleashing a slender beam invisible to the rearers below that silently swept across the hamlet. The bride felt an unusual sensation, a far-off hum captured midway during laughter. Looked up, a fascinated look on her face, but the moment disappeared. Laughing dragged her back. She looked to her husband, not knowing that his eye stayed on her a little longer than normal, absorbing every element to commit the first explosion to memory. Silent, the ground vibrated, knocking people off balance. The shock waved, flattening tables and sending glass breaking across the clearing. Calm uncertainty swept over the audience, yet before the first screen pierced through the second assault and tore across the center of the village, a blaze of searing light. People scattered, plunging into anarchy, dust as structures collapsed. Lungs and stinging eyes mixed with the consistent buzz of the alien ship hovering invisibly across the planet. I shouted for aid. Her lips moved, calling as the bride's eyes fastened on her spouse across the moving throng. Chaos yelled his name, but the roar of another explosion ate her voice. She ran, feet hardly touching the earth as she battled her way over the throng toward him, but the distance seemed to extend. Then a dazzling flash surrounded each step she took from her father. The ship above was merely a means of fulfillment for their needs. But to him, the husband, it was everything ripped apart in a flash. For hours he sieved through the debris, hands bleeding and raw, unwilling to stop, even when his body almost passed out. Friends tried to drag him away, but he shrugged them off, his mind fixed in a single primal focus. By the time he discovered her, the dawn's shattered casting of a chilly clarity over the instruction, she would have heard his voice lost in the quiet. So knelt, pressing a palm to her cheek, whispering things that developed a resolve rooted steadfast as steel, sharpener than any blade. His bride had been his anchor, more than just a wife she had known. Kept him grounded. Today she was gone, stolen by entities believing they could leave the man. Rose eyes cold, staring far, unchallenged. Those who knew him understood that look, one they had seen only in the most toughest soldiers, a result of training sharpened in survival and stolen in battle. It was a look remarked someone was going to pay. He gathered what few items he required. Each item carried weight, a reminder of abilities refined over years of relentless training with the SAS, created in circumstances most wouldn't withstand his fingertips, stroking faded recollections of missions that brought him to the brink, but just shattered him recently as he fled the settlement as a different man. The vessel had marked its course of attack. Every detail etched in his memory had not concealed their tracks as completely as they had assumed. Understood him as they would have undervalued all of mankind, and that was their fatal error. The alien, the outpost they destroyed recently, sent the most recent skin reports to the command center on board the warship. There was minimal danger to them. It was one of many such purifying trips. Hereafter, what was humanity to them but another species hardly beyond their reach? First Space Station smiled as they examined their report files, hardly giving Earth second consideration, but their laughing in the shadows was fleeting as the sun started to sink beyond the horizon. The spouse and operator crawled forward, his mind functioning with mechanical accuracy. Every breath he took, every sound he produced under deliberate control. This was not anger. Vengeance, sharpened to perfection, moved undetectably, where he could see them pick their routines and discover their shortcomings. The aliens felt untouchable, at ease with their technology, but lacking human knowledge. For all their intelligence resolve, they had no idea what a man might accomplish when he had nothing left to lose. As the agent settled into his watch, he followed her laughter's memories. Her grin energized him, turned the suffering into something far more piercing than loss. The universe blurted around him, down to his objective. He would make them feel it. They would know who they had misgressed with every breath that went by. Silent promise grew. They could have taken everything from him, but he would take everything from them carefully. The bride they slaughtered was not any ordinary human she had known. and by the time he finished they would know that some errors cost far more than any power that technology could generate. The night was frigid and calm, the silence disturbed only by the gentle crunch of his boots as he proceeded with the simplicity and silence across the last few meters of open terrain toward the alien camp. Like a predator, his eyes absorbing every detail, his mind mulling over each obvious observation suitable for the greater plan developing in his mind. He had been following the aliens for days, observing their movements. When they changed their patrols, where they positioned their soldiers, every second he stayed undetectable, tightened his approach. News overwhelmed them. The extraterrestrial force was more exact in habit than he had anticipated. They traveled in groups of 3, trading words in their unusual guttural language. Along their mechanical perfect courses, Vision observed their patterns and quickly worked to learn their extremely odd weaponry that hummed with mild power and produced no light. He sensed a faint trail in the air, remaining warm. As he passed every detail, it was still warm on his skin. Breadcrumb guiding him to his target when he came to the brink of their primary supply line. He bent low and scanned the foundation for any motion sensors or tripwires. The aliens believed themselves impervious. Their camp was little defended, with just a few guards on duty. To see the perimeter, he moved like a shadow, passing between the undetectable intervals between guards. They weren't ready for him. They never gave any thought to what would be central in the supply area. He silently high-piled inventory containers loaded with power cell energy packs, ammo, cartridges. He placed tiny objects, a few homemade charges hidden among trash. They were the fear he wanted them to be, not the explosions he was seeking until it was too late. Know that he was here, observing their piece-by-piece destruction, till they couldn't tell friend from enemy. Back off. He positioned himself out of sight in the shadows, but within earshot, listening. As a group of aliens walked toward the supply area, he waited till their unusual metallic tones permeated the air. Were near till he could see the glimmer of their armor. Then, with exact sharpness movement, he set out the blast's charges over the quiet. A short distance, tremendous explosion that left the lone survivor staggered, 2 of the aliens dead, and the third bewildered, thrown to the ground, its feet scuttling the darkness and fright, weapon elevated, claws rattling. It sounded a shrill, terrified cry for backup, but nobody responded. He waited so the alien might experience the quiet solitude before he moved. Without a word, he emerged from the shadows, his fluid motions in seconds, laying on the ground unmoving. Its weapon dropped next. By the time more aliens arrived, he was gone, vanishing into the darkness like a ghost, leaving just the traces of his work. Discovered their dead, the burned ground where his charges had left their mark, and the burning remains of their equipment. Their voices grew frenzied as they struggled to make sense of it. Panic tore over their ranks. Erratic, he observed from a distance, his demeanor frigid. This was merely he withdrew at first to a safe distance, then spent many hours observing their reaction and recording how they changed their guards to tighten their formations. They were becoming nervous, every death fraying their calm, destroying their illusion of superiority he wanted them to experience. That creeping dread, the slow twisting anxiety sinking deeper with every inexplicable death, every shadow that passed. Moved barely beyond their view before daylight, then started once more, this time aiming for their channels of communication. And his relay station was a great steel tower buzzing. Their early morning light would have enveloped energy enclosed by soft humming thin cables. 2 guards would have stood close by, their backs turned to him as he walked with purposeful serenity, his strides light. The horizon was deserted. Motions regulated. In a few seconds he was upon them, disabled with practiced precision, making sure they rapidly turned off the primary relay, breaking their link to the larger, not having an opportunity to alert inside fleet. The complete isolation, their communications down, would be blind, unable to cry for aid. Caught with him in the barren terrain they made, he moved on, crippled, tools behind him, as he vanished into the shadows, once more a quiet force against an opponent he had not yet seen. He worked each memory was a softness of her voice, the warmth in her eyes. He thought of her laughing. Heartbeat, a silent drum pushing him forward, helped him to steady his grief-driven. He changed into a relentless will that sharpened his every motion, focused into a razor. He was a man on a mission, his will absolutely obvious. By the end of the day, the alien camp collapsed. People gathered together in small groups, casting tents on their triggers. Anxious looks in the darkness beyond their lights seen by him, and silently betray their frailty in all their technology. Their advanced weaponry lacked a planned, relentless attack against a single human with nothing left to lose. He watched them from the brink of the camp, ghostly in the darkness, haunting their every move. He would assign them no rest, no chance for regrouping, no pity. Discover from a human who has previously given everything they would know, That their technology, their superiority, meant nothing in the face of pure relentless resolve, he withdrew, just before dawn, leaving the alien camp in a mess. They hurried to fix their tools, to replace their losses, to grasp the nature of the threat that tormented them. However, there was little they could do to offset it. From the darkness that had enveloped their camp, the silent, terrible power that stalked them as the first from a distance, his look calmed down. Ray of sunshine crept over the horizon. He had only started every step, and every slaughter served as a reminder of the life they had promised. He would not stop until every last one of them felt the weight of their axe. The cost of their actions, their conceit, had taken everything from him, and in response he would take one item at a time till there was just silence. The alien camp settled into a tense hush, its troops clearly visible. Unsettled, they launched sharp, paranoid flashes to every shadow. The confident precision with which they had arrived in their place was fingers shaking near their weapons gone. A creeping dread, the gradual gnawing horror of a force they could not see, but felt hovering in every direction he gazed. From the gloomy note their fear, with icy delight he wanted them to break, to feel helpless, their faces hard. Foreign and proud now flash uncertainty and concern, each one tormented by the deaths that had come without notice. They had anticipated to rule everything here. Then they could not move as they wanted. He would make that feeling stick, even if he was under observation. The operator put up his next attack, this time using a little of psychological warfare he had discovered their supply of. Water, watched by two soldiers too tired to see him prowling close by the two, missed the faint click of a little valve, would leave no long-lasting damage, even as he dumped a benign but unpleasant-tasting chemical into their tanks. Would make every drop taste sour and putrid within hours. He knew the aliens would sense the change, questioning if it was sabotage or some unknown earth poison already on top of their thoughts. Spin, he stayed hidden as the camp woke up to their poison drink. Aliens were upset, hissing to one another in urgent tones. Their clipped sentences were frantic. He watched them pour out the contaminated water, doubtful of its origins, casting dubious looks even at their own allies. Little planned disruptions like these. Thus gradually the unity broke down. The commander, recognizable from his uniform's black insignia and his distinctive posture of the others, hurried frantically close to the camp's center. The commander barking commands, demanding explanations, denying to recognize the clear something or someone was doing to them, and every other time one of his soldiers tried to suggest sabotage, the commander silenced them with a loud growl. Even the commander struck once again as night fell, unable to stop the spread of anxiety. He had seen how the aliens behaved. In time he used one of their own weapons, a sleek rifle that pulsed with mild electricity. Managed to observe the way they primed and aimed in his palms. It felt unusual heavy. But he took his place at the edge of the clearing, where the shadows, not needing grace, only precision, absorbed him completely, and focused his first blast toward one of their sentries, sending the aliens stretched out to the earth, and another arm followed in grazing direction. Abandoning him injured and running in panic, the other troops scattered, yelling for reinforcements, but he was already gone, leaving the gun placed in a mocking state. Show as though asking them to try their own game, the aliens discovered the weapon and huddled around it, murmuring. The operative could clearly see the cracks developing in their ranks on their faces. Their voices clearly revealed this. Lately filled with pride and apathy, now showed the clear indicators of anxiety. They had anticipated a rapid, simple mission, a relentless display of strength. They hadn't signed up for. Shadow picked each one individually the following day, staying behind to let they would be unsettled in the silence. He knew each minute without an attack would cause them to lose control. Later on, in panic, they would be left perplexed, wondering about every sound, every shade the low sun created. Whispers of wind allowed their anxiety to linger. Knowing it would erode their will by midday, he watched them in complete collapse. Broken into smaller groupings, some intensely focused, mistrustful looks at one another. A few whispered among themselves, too disturbed to keep their anxiety hidden in these little gatherings. It was simpler to observe how everyone was breaking through the gaps and their confidence growing with every nervous glancing over their shoulders. He decided the next phase days were appropriate. As darkness fell once more, he snuck into the camp unnoticed and moved among their tents one by one, like a shadow. Little marks on the walls indicate symbols from his own world, but alien to them. Wanted them to be aware they were under observation, to feel the weight of an enemy, aware of their routines, who was close enough to touch yet stayed just out of reach. The marks were found inside ours. He listened from the commander, struggled to maintain discipline as the edges stumbled over them, their cries rising in terror. Roaring orders for silence, but the tension was too great. The terror too, the troops murmured among themselves, voices tinged with doubt. He pointed to the marks, whispering a single word in their language, a term he knew, and watched one of them shake. Ghost left behind one of his wife's possessions to confirm their fear. He said it clearly on a rock at the edge of their campground, little jewelry she had worn on their wedding day. Though they lacked understanding of its meaning, he wanted them to see it, to experience its weight. It was a quiet declaration. But evident this was personal when the camp collapsed the next morning, he saw from his vantage point. Concealed vantage point. As they looked at their alien visage, twisted in perplexity and terror, the commander's voice rose in a harsh, angry bark. Attempting to control was obviously lacking authority. Slipping, the troops fidgeted. They were too terrified to care. Tensely at the shadows, murmuring the word repeatedly, ghost, ghost, ghost. Every attack, each silent warning undermined their composure, and he could sense their change in behavior. Soldiers today were prey. They were starting to see the essence of their opponent, not only a human but also a someone far more tenacious, ready to break them one by one. Knowing how to cause dread by the end of the day, they were clearly frantic. The commander gave his surviving soldiers orders, intending to isolate them from the invisible threat, evacuate the camp and head into a safer area. But he knew as they packed that they weren't fleeing. He had seen the resolution shatter in their eyes, felt their fear shine in the air, and he knew they knew deep down there was no escape. He let them go. Glancing back with unsteady steps over their shoulders, they felt they could outpace him and sought refuge somewhere open. Hadn't yet appreciated the full weight of his will to withstand. They had assumed they were the predators, but now they were just shadows dancing from the blackness, pursued by a man who would not relax until every one of them paid for what they had taken from him would be just beyond their view. Something lurks waiting that would cause them to run, terrified by spectra they could not see, but whose presence they could sense in every breath. They had produced a fatal error by now. He was confident they understood that there would be no pardon or pity. His area now was inaccessible for the alien convoy to pass across. With a line of tired soldiers peering over their shoulders, the night was heavy and each sound echoed. Enhanced in the tense silence, they moved in close alignment. Every step laden carried the weight of their fear. Soldier gripped their rifle as like it were the only thing holding them to safety. Her gaze flew from shadow to shadow. They had left the camp in search of protection in numbers. But it did not help to release the anxiety clinging to. He followed them patiently and silently as a phantom slipped over the night. Now the operator realized the weaknesses in their formations. They were not trained for this kind of fighting. They depended on numbers and technology, anticipating adversaries to collapse back at the sight of their advanced weaponry. But he had no intention of withdrawing, not until they paid in full for what they had done. He went into position ahead of the convoy, setting his trap with practiced precision. Thin, almost undetectable wire secured between two jagged boulders, a little charge deftly concealed. Weighted by loose soil, he timed everything to impact when their guard was at its lowest. When tired and least aware, the first soldier stumbled across the fence, and the explosive exploded with a sharp, forceful blast, sending a dust and trash plume skyward. The alien convoy broke into anarchy. Cries of soldiers dove for cover, rushed to regroup. He observed from the shadow the detonator chilly in his grasp, awaiting the ideal time to strike one soldier apart from the others. His eyes locked. The operative moved, sliding through the darkness, closing on the twisted remains of his fallen friend. The silence and distance in a continuous practice motion. He seized the soldier, dragging him into the shadows before the alien could have a cry. It was over. The body collapsed to the ground, concealed from the other's view. Back in the Kona, the surviving troops called out their strained voices, but their lost friend responded nowhere. They gathered closer, huddling as they left their dead behind. The commander yelled march orders, trying to bring things back, but his voice lacked the force it used once. As the night drew on, the operator kept attacking. The fear had crept into his voice, shredding his authority. Every time a troop lagged or separated, aided, he was there, a silent reaper in the darkness. Each kill was clean, efficient. The aliens could sense the presence that left little trace beyond the weakest whisper of motion. Stall them, but he was everywhere and nowhere, hence they could not stop him. Dream haunting just beyond their grasp, the commander gave the convoy orders to quicken its pace. His voice broke as he pushed them ahead, away from the cursed ground. Each stride they made resulted in yet another loss. Soldiers seized by the shadows, their numbers dropped, their fear increasing with every second. They were no longer troops, were prey sought after by an army devoid of compassion. When dawn broke, the alien commander scanning the horizon yearns to find, so the convoy staggered to a stop near the edge of a precipice. Some evidence of escape. The cliff was a precipitous drop into the sharp rocks below. They could go no further. Tired and battered, the surviving troops gathered around, looking terrified into from a distance. The operative observed the trees where their invisible adversaries still hid, noting their tiredness, their hollowed expressions, their pride and arrogance. All had been stripped away. Just fear. He moved forward, allowing himself to be first observed. A lone figure against early dawn light. The aliens stopped their breaths, taking sight of their invisible predator was finally revealed, and he walked slowly. One of the troops lifted his weapon, hand shaking, intentional, giving them no time to misinterpret his intent. Yet the commander yelled at him to reduce it. The operator's visage was icy, his eyes hard, bereft of anything like mercy, stopped just out of reach, staring each one of them in the eyes to ensure they realized who had bested them. Without saying, he held up a little remote detonator gadget. Clicked the button, and a reminder of what he had destroyed burst in the distance from the supply camp. Piece by piece, the shock waves shook the ground under them, a last blow to their will. They turned to face him. Dawning in their eyes, he had started this from the beginning, every stride. Computed every action meant to bring them here to this moment of total failure. The agent turned and strolled far away, leaving them to go to their terror. Their humiliation vanished back into the shadows he knew would never come back to Earth, carrying with them the memories of this evening. The aliens had come expecting an easy conquest, but had left knowing a terrible reality throughout their lifetimes. Regarding humanity, he sensed a faint hollow as he sank into the night and realized they were not to be discounted. Though it was something they had, pleasure would not bring her back the vacuum caused by her absence. Stolen everything from him, and that would be plenty given his vision of what that felt like. The smell of smoke permeated the air as the few remnants of the alien camp smelt far away. The lone man vanishing into the forest caused a terrible quiet to envelop surviving troops. Commander, weary and tired, slumped against the rock, eyes haunted. She hadn't only lost troops, every morsel of excellence had started as a show, and every ounce of confidence had vanished. Their crew scattered, vanquished by one guy, a force to remind humanity of its place, had resulted in anarchy. The leader lifted a quivering hand silently to tell his last men to get ready, for they proceeded slowly, as though in a day, each one looking back at the blackness. Woodlands, as though they expected him to show up at any moment. They lacked the energy to fight. They had been shattered as they got ready to leave her surface, and the operative observed from a high ridge, tracking every. Though it was tempered with the sad weight of loss, his objective, the slight pleasure of victory stayed. Seemed perfect, but the empty aching stayed, a reminder that revenge could never really bring back what had been taken. He had got his retribution, but she was still gone, a hole he would always carry with him. For a brief period, he thought about reversing, letting them go to share the narrative of their failure. The narrative of what a single human could accomplish could be sufficient to discourage next attacks. But then he considered her laughter and warmth, the future she considered, the life she had been deprived of, and the quiet brutality of it, then a cold finality. They had hardly started to build. Calmed over him, they couldn't be let to go. They hadn't just demolished his world, they had taken from him the one thing that had ever really mattered. They would pay the ultimate cost. He went fast, silently efficient, overtaking the survivors as they staggered toward the forest. Still remains of their transportation, the craft was a small emergency vessel used. When their primary camp was compromised, it was not meant for long-distance travel only. They neared the vessel. The captain could call for a pickup from the brink of Earth's atmosphere. Paused, peering over his shoulder. The obvious terror in his eyes evident in the others followed his eye, and for a minute their breaths stopped their faint motion. Their enemy hadn't really fled in the cover of darkness, and they knew somewhere deep down they were still not safe. Darkness, he slipped, was positioned close to the vessel he knew's entrance ramp. The moment to their confidence destroyed, they would not be expecting another attack. He waited for. They were tired. His pulse consistent, his approach with the deliberate precision of a predator, then exactly as the final soldier approaches. Ready to board, he left the shadows. The alien turned to see, gaping in terror upon seeing a solitary individual, still and uncompromising, the embodied every dream they had gone through in the past 3 days. The soldier raised his rifle, but the operative dropped his weapon, and faster, a flash of steel slashing across the air. The alien collapsed to the ground. Others stopped, too tired to resist, too depleted, clattering next him. Even raised their arms as the commander locked from top of the ramp eyes with him. His operational focus remained constant, a mirror reflecting everything. He had gone through all he had lost, so he stepped forward, and the commander staggered back with a desperate tremor over his face, speaking in that was low and chilly. At last the operative broke the stillness. "You came to show us our place," he pronounced each word deliberately. "And today you know yours." The commander, groping for his pistol, swallowed his hand, but the operator raised his own rifle level. He didn't have to say more every movement, every breath at the alien's chest. Every decision he took had resulted in this moment they had undervaluated humanity, had paid the cost with a final misreading of compassion for weakness. He shot the commander, stumbled back in a flash of astonishment, a steady squeeze. Before he collapsed at the ramp's base, crossing his face, the other soldiers cast sidelights also. Startled to respond, their spirits crushed their fear felt by the operative turned his eyes, glancing over the visage of every frozen survivor. He lowered his firearm but kept their eye, allowing the stillness to linger between them to let their weight sink in. Activities in those times he realized he shouldn't have finished all they would carry the memories of him of this. Night with them, always they would be the ones to assure by spreading the news permanently. That nobody dared to repeat their error satisfied, so he retreated, enabling the survivors boarding the ship they stumbled upon glanced back at him, their faces mixed with terror and disbelievement, and when the ramp closed shutting them inside he observed silently. His position resolved the low, uncertain tremor of the ship's engines, filled the clearing as it raised above the ground he neglected not until the ship had vanished into the heavens, leaving only the faintest echo of its leaving. The silence that followed found him alone in the woodland, the dawn's pale light spreading over the earth closed his eyes, allowing the stillness to cover him. The pain of loss was still there, sharp and relentless, yet he also had an odd serene tranquility, had turned to abandon a single person, having maintained his pledge to her, had helped them to see the consequences of their behavior. Memory recalled her laughing, as kind and pleasant as sunlight peeking through a storm. He took with him a quiet commitment to serve as a reminder of everything he battled. He entered the jungle a walking target for loss. Single person fading into the shadows, leaving behind the scarred terrain of his vengeance the aliens would recall, but he had done it for her, for the lifetime, not for them. They would have shared in the love they had only started to experience, and in that he discovered a quiet type of victory, one that would linger long after he vanished and could never be taken. He sensed a small wordless fragment settle within him into the morning light, understanding. She would have recognized he had done for her wherever she went, hence it was sufficient.